Welcome. I am Lucinda Curran, your host for the Environmental Sensitivities Symposium, a world-first event. And today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Professor Olle Johansson. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on the program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let's dive straight in, and I'm going to ask you to tell us about the amazing work that you do, please.
Well, I would love to echo what you say, but I don't think it is very amazing because we have a very hard time to getting the economic resources that we need. So most of the time we are struggling with applications and we are struggling against all possible hardship. And we really need to get these issues solved because we know or hope at least that we can do so much more. And the aim of our work is to study health effects of electromagnetic fields from artificial sources such as radio, television, mobile phones, wireless indoor phones, tablets, wireless internet, and so on. And what happens with molecules, cells, tissues, organs, animals, plants, bacteria, and also, of course, humans when we are exposed 24/7 to these extremely high levels of microwave radiation, also power-frequent magnetic fields, and so on. And we are also particularly interested in the functional impairment, electrohypersensitivity, and I've been working with that since the end of the 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s.
That's a very long time to be in the field. What drew you to work in that area all those years ago?
Oh, it was really a pure chance, because I did something one evening which I practically never do. I listened to a radio program in my laboratory at that time. And I remember at 8 o'clock that evening there was a program with a woman from one of the trade union offices here in Sweden. And she was asking for expertise in neurology. And I'm not a neurologist, but a neuroscientist. And I thought that was close enough. And her interest was a new type of persons that had got skin problems, irritations, rashes, pains, and so on, when they had been sat in front of the new computer screens. We were at the beginning of the personal computer revolution, and particularly women at offices suddenly got these very fun and very usable machines, but also quickly they developed different skin problems in the exposed areas. And this woman at the trade union office, her name is Kajsa Vedin, she was asking for expertise in various areas because she was very interested to investigate what was actually going on and why did these people get these problems and how could they be cured, or how could the effects be lowered from the radiation sources. And I, after that program, called her, and as you say in English, the rest is history.
That's incredible. And so at that stage, you were really only looking at the effects on skin. Is that right?
Yes, we started with that. First of all, of course, these persons did complain about skin problems, but they also had other issues like breathing problems, heart palpitations, etc. But for us, it would have been much harder to get any tissue pieces from their heart or their lungs, for instance. So in a sense, it was good luck that they also had these skin problems. And we started to take biopsies. We didn't do it immediately, but after some time. And we started to investigate the human skin. And we quickly found out that actually normal, healthy human skin wasn't very well established at all. I thought everything was solved, that every detail was known, but it wasn't. So in parallel, we also worked with normal, healthy volunteers, and quickly we began to realize that the persons with these skin issues in front of computer screens, they had alterations that, to begin with, very easily could explain their subjective symptoms, but also it pointed very clearly to that it was a classical radiation damage, very much the same you would have seen being confronted with X-rays or radioactivity or strong ultraviolet light, and they had not been subjected to that. They were just sitting in front of these computer screens, and we coined the term screen dermatitis to then point to that people got these special changes in front of visual display terminals, cathode ray tubes with strong radiation, strong fields. So our working hypothesis very early became that they were just victims of a radiation damage. In parallel, of course, other doctors especially and a few scientists, they started along other routes of explanation, and there were various popular models used, for instance, that the persons were just imagining this. It was just women, and when men started to come forward with the same problems, people said that they were persons with a low level of education, and then came professors and doctors and lawyers and so on, and then it was changed to that it was persons with a high level of education, and also, of course, a lot of focus was put on you, actually, in the sense that the explanatory model that came into fashion was that this was just a mass media psychosis, a mass media hysteria. And all of these explanatory models, as you hear, they could easily be investigated using controlled experiments, for instance, with rats, which we also did together with colleagues. And, of course, these rats also turned out to have the very same changes at the cellular and molecular level, and you cannot accuse a rat of being a victim of a mass media psychosis. Rats do not read newspapers, they do not listen to radio, they don't watch television, and still they got the very same cellular and molecular changes in their skin.
That's quite incredible, the progression that each time there was a different excuse. So, the first one, I'm adding this to it, but hysterical women, and then people who aren't qualified or educated, and then mass hysteria, basically. It's fascinating that there's always got to be another explanation for something that's really quite obvious when you look at it.
Yes, indeed. And, I remember very clearly that stepwise, the opponents, they went through all these explanations, trying to get rid of the problem that way. But of course, these men and women, and young and old, and with different occupations, different levels of education, different income levels, different political color, and so on, they all got struck with the very same radiation damage. And as I said before, when you looked in the skin, the only thing you can think about was the classical images that had been produced, like in the 20s for X-rays, in the 40s and 50s for radioactivity and ultraviolet light and so on. It was really a classical radiation damage. And of course, nowadays you don't hear anything about these kind of explanations any longer. There are too many scientific papers published in too many scientific models using too many animals and cellular systems, so it's just impossible to sort of get away by pointing to postmenopausal women or low-educated men. So it's not possible to do that any longer. And in the meantime, of course, and we will come back to that, also electron hypersensitivity, which is the new term for screen dermatitis, has gained the status of being a disability or functional impairment. And again, no one would dare to speak against such a nomenclature.
That's very true. And I remember recently reading something that you'd written about an experiment that was done with ants and watching their behavior. Could you tell us about that, please?
Oh, that's yet another model which cannot be explained with any of these sort of early explanatory models. What we did was, together with a colleague in Belgium, that we exposed ants. And to make a long story short, ants, when they live on a surface and they cannot escape from it, they will organize this area in a classical way. They will have parts of this area where they eat, for instance, parts where they keep their babies, and parts where they have their toilet, parts where they sleep. And if you then expose them in a controlled way from the field from a mobile phone, and if you, for instance, put them below the chamber where they keep their babies, they will immediately get very stressed. They will analyze their environment. They will stop frequently and look around, and they will start to remove all these babies and put them diagonally to the other end of this area, and they will take instead their toilet and put it above the mobile phone. And if you then remove it and take it away, then they will rearrange their home, sort of. So they are very, very sensitive to these types of radiations we are talking about. A mobile phone kept below a table in this controlled way will give off microwaves, but also, of course, strong power-frequent magnetic fields, and we don't know yet which type they did react to, but it's very obvious that they were very, very sensitive. And the scary thing with this kind of experiments is that, of course, ants are not the consumers. They are not the ones that will go to the shops and buy Christmas presents in the form of new iPhones or new tablets or whatever. That's us. That's the human beings, and we are not sensitive enough, maybe, so we don't react to these electromagnetic fields in the same way. Of course, people with electrohypersensitivity will do it. They will not buy these gadgets. They will not expose themselves. And from that point of view, maybe they are kind of winners in the sense that if there are, and that's a lot of debate about that, if there are long-term effects such as neurological damage or cancer, the persons with electrohypersensitivity may not get these long-term effects. Whereas you and I, that are not electrohypersensitive, we will then expose ourselves, and maybe in 30 years' time, we will suddenly wake up one day to the information from a physician saying, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you have a brain tumor. So we are the ones exposing ourselves and maybe then getting the long-term effects.
It's so interesting, and I have to thank you for sharing the ant story, because when I read that, it was really funny in one aspect that their toilet was the area that was worst affected by the EMF. And it was so sensible that they acted quickly. And I know your comment to do with that was that the ants are acting, and we're still standing around talking about it.
Yeah. And most people don't even talk about it because most people are not aware at all about this discussion. Only people that inform themselves through, for instance, newspaper articles or radio programs are the ones that at least start to talk about it. But the ants, they didn't pay very much attention to talking. They just rearranged their living quarters quickly. And it was actually, from a behavioral point of view, stressful to watch these ants, because the moment the mobile phones were put on, they immediately started to stop more frequently when they walked around in their home. They stopped and they stood up and they moved their body in a half circle, scanning it for something. And only stressed ants do that. Normally they just walk and do whatever they need to do, but they stopped and scanned the environment, walked on for a few steps, stopped again, scanned, and I felt quite alarmed by that, because it's a very sensitive and very obvious sign that something in their environment did stress them. And of course, with no other parallels, but when we talk about the modern human man and woman and child, I read more and more frequently about that we are stressed for various reasons. I don't dispute that, but the question is, all these electromagnetic fields, do they actually add to our stressful situation? And as you probably have seen in the scientific literature, there's quite a debate regarding the connection between early exposure to electromagnetic fields and the later development of, for instance, attention deficit syndromes like ADHD and so on. And there are quite a number of papers showing that, for instance, fetuses as well as newly born babies, their heart rate gets stressed by the mother's use of mobile phones. And when I ask parents, when I give lectures, if they think it's all right that their mobile phone will stress the little baby's heart, if that's all right with them, no one stands up and says, yes, that's all right with me. All the parents and even people not being parents, they are very alarmed about that kind of studies. And there are more and more and more about this. And still, as you said so elegantly, we just talk about it and not very much is happening.
It's astounding. And I actually believe that many more people are electrically hypersensitive and have no idea that that's the cause of what's going on for them.
Oh, that's a very clever comment, and from various studies, and I could start to talk a little bit about our own. We did, for instance, provocation studies using normal, healthy volunteers. We took students, medical and dental students, and we put them with their backs towards computer screens and household television sets, and they were sitting at a distance at about 40 centimeters, which is a viewing distance when you use a computer, for instance, and they should just tell us if there was something that they felt that was not normal. And they sat there for 8 hours, which is a normal working day here in Sweden, and with their backs onto it, and they should report everything. And it turned out that they didn't have any subjective sensations. Some of the students felt bored by sitting with their backs towards computer screens and television sets. But when we took skin biopsies in the very same mode as we had done years earlier for persons with screen dermatitis, it turned out that quite a big number of the students had cellular reactions as if we would have put them close to X-ray, strong ultraviolet light, or plutonium or uranium. And we hadn't. We just put them 40 centimeters from safe computer screens and safe household television sets, and still their body reacted with a very strong and clear stress reaction. The cells prepared themselves for sending signals to the immune system to protect the body to this radiation. And that was, for us, a huge surprise. And I remember when we tried to publish the results, it took a number of years because scientific journals, they just couldn't buy the results, because the idea was that computer screens and television sets are safe. They do not in any way interact with your body. And when we showed that it did also with normal human volunteers, many editors just couldn't buy it. But eventually an American journal said, wow, this has to be published. And it is out in the public domain since 2001. And again, it points to that we may very well react to our environment. And as you so very elegantly point out, when you talk with normal healthy volunteers, and nowadays I actually put quotation marks around healthy, because it points to that very many do have health issues that could be explained by the very high radiation levels that we live in 24/7, wherever we are, and which hits our body, the entire body, all the time. And a colleague to me, we tried to persuade the authorities here in Sweden to allow us to do a full-scale experiment with a small Swedish town. The idea was that we should remove all wireless information, including mobile phones. Tablets were not even invented at that time, but corresponding computers, television, radio, etc. They should just have the possibility to call the fire brigade and the police and the ambulance. That would be it. And then we would look after like 1 or 2 years, and the idea was to see if healthy persons would have become more healthy. And unfortunately, we were not allowed to do this investigation, but I still think it's very valid and very important, because I have the very same feeling as you say. There are more electrohypersensitive persons out there, and also normal healthy volunteers. They are not that healthy, actually.
I agree with you. Now, we're just about out of time for this part of it, but I need to ask you, why are you so passionate about the work that you do?
Oh, that's very kind of you to say that, well, I mean, that's my nature. I would be passionate about anything, including things in my garden or walking around with my cats or talking with my wife or whatever. I would be passionate about anything. And, of course, also for electron hypersensitivity and the health effects of electromagnetic fields. For me as a scientist, it has meant something very new. I constantly meet and talk to real human beings. Most scientists, as I was too, we are sort of locked away from the reality, and we spend time with test tubes and microscopic slides. But suddenly, the need of society is very, very clear to me, and the most common call I get is a concerned parent. And the question is very, very simple. This wireless internet in my school for my kids, is it safe or not? So it's very sort of basic questions concerned parents have. And they call and call and call, and from all corners of the world. And the debate is going on. And sometimes I try to have answers, but very often, unfortunately, I have to say, very good question. I don't have an answer, but if we had the resources to investigate it, I would love to do it. But it's very, very difficult here in Sweden to get any funding.
Professor Olle Johansson will be a speaker at the Environmental Sensitivities Symposium. You can find out more by going to environmentalsensitivities-symposium.com.